Good afternoon. Can you hear me now? Yes. Desculpa-me, pero no puedo hablar sua língua muito bem. Não falo bem português. Necessito que eu hable em inglês, if that's okay. I want to talk about values. It's a very important topic that people don't think about very carefully. The great Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung said once, and I agree, religion is the most powerful force in human affairs, and it is. And religion is just about values. So that means, by definition, that the values are the most important force in human affairs. I think that's true. And some people are attracted to certain kinds of values, and other people are attracted to other kinds of values, which means values and personality are related in certain ways that we don't particularly. No one studies values. So psychologists study people, sociologists study organizations. Psychologists ignore organizations. They do. They don't care about organizational context. And sociologists ignore people. They don't think people matter. They say personality doesn't exist. So academics, generally speaking, then academics ignore the topic. Cultural anthropologists study values, and they have almost nothing to say. But values are what link people to organizations. It's values that tie people to organizations. That is to say, people join organizations based on their values, and they stay in organizations or leave organizations based on their values. So this talk concerns how values impact the success of people and organizations. Oh, there you go. Where do values come from? Children unconsciously adopt the values of their parents. They take their parents' values in the way they take in their mother's milk. It's a seamless process, and that just sets their whole life. And so, and they don't know they're doing it. And parents don't even know they're typically self-consciously inculcating values in their kids. So kids take in their values from their parents, and that explains the continuity. Values are the DNA of culture. Values explain the continuity of culture across generations. Your political values, your religious values, your social values are pretty much identical to your parents. So culture is incredibly stable across generations, and the reason for that is because of values. Values are the DNA of culture. They're the reason it's the culture. They're the vehicles of culture transmission. Which means that values tend to be unconscious. Mostly they are. Mostly people don't know what their values are. As Mark Twain, the famous American humorist, once said, it's not what you don't know that will hurt you, it's what you do know that isn't true. And values are what you know that are probably oftentimes not true. So values are terribly important. Values are unconscious. They come from your family and your culture, and it's just most people lack any kind of distance, or it's what consciousness raising is all about. It's what Karl Marx was talking about when he talked about false consciousness. You have to systematically and self-consciously work on getting people to understand their values because they just take them for granted. Okay, so how are personality and values related? Personality characteristics are almost always on. So if you're an extrovert, you're constantly looking for interaction, just constantly looking for interaction. But values operate when it's time to make a decision, when it's time to make a choice. So personality is always on. Values kick in when you have to make a decision about the choice points. So personality concerns typical behaviors. Values concern typical choices. So personality is how you interact with other people. It determines how you interact with other people. Values concern if you're in charge, if people depend on you, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a boss, if you're a policeman, if you're in charge of other people, your values determine what you reward and what you punish. Values are what creates the culture of any organization. So values are what you impose, or the dimensions you impose on other people. So personality is just about how to interact. Values is about how to create a culture. The culture in the home, the culture in the church, the culture in the school, the culture in the Army, the Navy, the Marines, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so values are about culture creation. Personality is about interaction. Values are about culture creation. Okay, so I think I need to back up one, if you would, please. Yes, thank you. So this is true. People are focused on themselves and their lives, their daily doings, what they're going to eat, what they're going to drink, where they're going to go next, what time it is, whether they have to go to the bathroom. But what really matters in your life, what really matters in the life is the quality of the organizations in which you're embedded. Your family, your church, your university, your government, If this was a map of the world and you were blindfolded and you threw a dart at the map of the world and you had to go live where the dart landed, The chances are seven chances out of 10 that you'll go to a failed state. A failed state. I mean, like Congo, you know. There you go. So people are preoccupied with their own lives, and what they don't understand is the quality of their lives really fundamentally depend on the quality of the organizations in which they operate, live, conduct their lives. Which means, and people don't understand, what's good for the organization will always be good for the individuals in the organization. But what's good for the individuals in the organization may or may not be good for the organization. That's true for two reasons. First of all, there's the free rider problem. It's a fact of biology, it's a fact of sociology, it's a fact of group living. We're a group living species. Rhesus monkeys, humans, chimpanzees, they're solitary species, and they're a group living species. In group living species, free riders always emerge. And a free rider is an individual that takes advantage of living in the group but doesn't contribute to the group. So in a pride of lions, you might have, say, 5 female lions. The male lions don't do anything. So the female lions do all the work. And in a pride of lions, there might be 5 lions, there might be 2 lions that hunt, and 3 who just sit around and wait for them to bring the food home. In every organization, free riders always emerge. It's worse than that. The level of free riders will increase typically. I mean, this is a law of biology. The number of free riders will increase to the point that it destroys the organization, because free riders don't care about the quality of the organization. And my last point would be, politicians are the free riders of human society. CC, es verdad. Thank you. And they will increase in numbers until everything falls apart. Okay, next slide. Here we go. Now, values, let's see how to put it. Some values, not all values are valuable. Some values produce bad results. And this book, which was a New York Times bestseller, argues that in the American South, which is heavily poor, quite poor, it's the poorest part of the United States, white people in the American South have bad values. And their bad values explain their economic misfortune. And how can I summarize their bad values? So I come from that part of the world myself. I understand those values really well. It's Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, very smart guy, made a distinction between primary and secondary process thinking. Primary process thinking is, if it feels good, do it. And do it now. And the sooner you do it, the better off you'll be. And secondary process thinking is, put off immediate gratification for long-term rewards. In other words, if it feels good, think about it, because you may not need to do that right now. It might be, so I'd say the poor white trash in the southern part of the United States operate according to the pleasure principle, primary process thinking, and those are bad, and they believe in it. I mean, they articulate those values. If it feels good, do it. You know, do it now. You only go around once. Well, c'est la vie. Okay, so. My bottom line here is, not all values are valuable. And I have this argument with my children all the time. Oh, this is your way of doing things, this is my way of doing things. No, all values are not equally valuable. There's a right way and a wrong way to do most things. So, values and prejudice. There's a guy named David Byrne who proposed a very powerful law. It really works. It's the similarity attraction hypothesis. It's about values. I actually gave this idea to eHarmony. This is the basis for relationships. We like people who share our values, and we can't stand people who don't share our values. Extroverts can get along with introverts. Conscientious people can get along with people who are not very kind. But if people are different in terms of their values, we'll talk about what they are later. People different in terms of, they will not get along. People will die before they change their values. Literally, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? I mean, people will literally die before they change their values. So if you're thinking about hooking up with somebody, you really need to check the value situation, because if you disagree on values, you're done. So he says values are the key to relationships, and values create unconscious biases, and and values don't change. You can't change values. Values at the age 6 or 7 years old are the same as the values at 80 years old. Values are probably values are more stable than IQ. So what you value at time 1 is what you're going to value at time 2, and if the other people don't agree with you, you just will not get along. So what that means, of course, is that values create prejudice. We don't like the people who don't share our values. So values are the key source of prejudice in the world, and goodness sakes, there's enough prejudice in the world, isn't there? One more time, not all values are equally valuable. So greed and selfishness are values. Money, 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 and to take care of yourself and screw all those other people. Greed and selfishness create self-serving elites, and they create a resentful have-not portion of society. So greed and selfishness are real. They characterize American business to an unfortunate degree. And they will argue with you that, this is the right, it's capitalism, right? Sorry to sound like a Marxist. I'm not really a Marxist, but it is capitalism. Greed and selfishness are not good. They create all sorts of problems. Some values produce better outcomes than others. So historians argue that how did Christianity hit the spot? Where did Christianity come from? Well, it turns out that in ancient Rome, the Christian community, the values of the Christian community led to better outcomes than the values of the pagan communities. And they just said, look, those guys are living better lives than we are, so here we go. And that was the payoff, just a better life. So not all values are equally valuable, and some values create better outcomes than others. And I believe it. Okay, here we go. So values are powerful, unconscious determinants of social behavior. How do values impact business or apply to business? And that's what we're doing next here. Okay. So the big one, the easy one, is a guy named Benjamin Snyder has what he calls an attraction selection attrition hypothesis. He argues, it's a simple argument, that people join organizations and leave organizations depending on the fit between their values and the culture of the organization. So organizations tend to attract a certain kind of people. The values of the organization are appealing to a certain kind of person. They're not appealing to another kind of person. So what you get over time is an organization become increasingly more homogeneous, more uniform, more centralized, and they also become less innovative, less creative, less able to change, and it creates cultural homogeneity and groupthink. But the big, I think, for speaking for individuals here, for the folks, you people who are in the people business, it doesn't matter how talented you are. If your values are inconsistent with the values of the culture, you're going to fail. There's nothing you can do. If your values are inconsistent, it doesn't matter how well you perform, they will reject you like an organ transplant, or you'll reject yourself. And I can give you example after example after example of this. We worked with a great big railroad in the United States. We worked with the marketing group. There were 9 white men and 1 Vietnamese woman. The Vietnamese woman had an MBA from Harvard. She was really creative. The 9 white guys didn't have a creative hair amongst them. The value profiles were, and she didn't last. She was the most talented person in the group. She didn't last 6 months. They just forced her out. That's just the way it goes. So values are an important dynamic in terms of organizational fit. Okay, and then I love these examples. These are real life examples of what I just said. AT&T is an engineering firm. It's a telephone. It's an engineering firm. Time Warner used to be an entertainment company, a very successful and wealthy entertainment, had HBO, made movies for a living. Well, in 2018, AT&T, the engineering firm, bought Time Warner, the creative firm, for $100 billion, which is a lot of money now. It was a hell of a lot of money in 2018. Engineers value process and control, regularity, similarity, reproducibility. Artists value freedom to explore, don't they? Let's try something new. And that's how they make their money. The values of AT&T and Time Warner were completely incompatible, and according to this quote is from the New York Times, a vibrant Time Warner culture of creative energy and success, and very real success. They were very wealthy. Nurtured, that was built over decades, it was destroyed in a couple of months. The deal failed in a year. It just failed, and it failed with Time Warner being destroyed because they fired all the top people who were creative and who wanted to stick up for the values of Time Warner. So there you go. AT&T, engineering firm, buys creative firm, destroys the culture, and puts them out of business. Do you see? They ruined it, and they wasted. They burned up $100 billion in the process. Okay. One of the really famous organizations in America in the 1990s was General Electric. It was run by a guy named Jack Welch. They called him, Fortune magazine called him the manager of the century. And everyone wanted to hire his protégés, people who had worked with Jack Welch. But GE and Jack Welch, it was greed and selfishness, exactly what I said. It was greed and selfishness, and all his lieutenants valued greed and selfishness. So what happened in 1997, Boeing needed new leadership, and they hired two guys away from General Electric, bringing with them their greed and selfishness ethic. A guy named Stonecipher and a guy named McNerney. Stonecipher was fired for sexual misconduct. McNerney was fired for incompetence. Anyway, between 1997, for a 10-year period, these two guys imposed General Electric values on Boeing. GE valued profitability, just money. It was just a greed and selfishness conglomerate. Boeing valued safety, precision, constant improvement, traditional engineering values. Stonecipher and McNerney vowed, they promised shareholders that they would run Boeing like a business and not an engineering firm. One of the things that happened was 40,000 engineers quit because they were running the company. And they ruined the company. They imposed GE values on Boeing, and boom. So McNerney was the guy who insisted on building the new 737 MAX using the old airframe, and two of them crashed, and 350 people died, and they've never recovered from that. So that's what happens when you impose, when you do a values transplant, and you put inappropriate values on a functioning team. You see the point? Impose the wrong values on the company, you're going to ruin it. We used to be big in the trucking business. We used to know a lot about trucking. And I remember the company that we worked with, which was the 7th largest trucking company in the United States, and very profitable. It was a family-owned business. They sold out the Yellow Truck, who just went bankrupt a couple months ago, and Yellow Truck ruined them within a year. You just see it over and over again. The wrong values, boom. Okay, so the values of the senior management are what drive corporate culture. The bosses, the guys up there, what they value, that means what they reward and what they punish, what they promote and what they subvert. Values of senior management drive corporate culture. Corporate culture drives employee engagement. Employee engagement predicts every significant business unit outcome that you can measure. Every employee engagement predicts absenteeism, turnover, productivity, customer service ratings. High engagement, you get high productivity, high quality ratings, high customer service ratings, and low turnover, and vice versa. So engagement is the vehicle by which culture is translated into the performance of the organization. You understand that? If you want a proxy for engagement, just ask the troops how much they trust their boss. One item: how much do you trust your boss? That works really well as just a quick and dirty. So, corporate culture drives employee engagement. Employee engagement drives every important organizational outcome that you can measure. So low engagement gives you bad results, high engagement gives you good results. So engagement is the critical temperature of the organization. Okay? And what's that all about? The values of the people with power create the culture, and as San Pedro Drucker said, he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture is way more important for strategy than strategy. And why is that? Because if the culture is dysfunctional, the strategy is going to fail because the employees are disengaged. Do you all see that? If the culture is dysfunctional, it will kill engagement and the strategy will fail because the troops won't implement the strategy. So culture eats strategy for breakfast because culture is about employee engagement and engagement is about performance. So what are the values that define a good organizational culture? I mean, that's the question that looms large, doesn't it? Well, it depends on who you ask, and mostly no one ever asks. Because most values research is descriptive. If they come into your organization, they tell you, here are the values that you have. Then that's it. Then they leave, and now you know what your values were. Well, because you probably didn't know before they did that. So values research almost never concerns organizational effectiveness. That's what we are all about, is making organizations work better by getting better people in place and treating them better. But the goal for us is making organizations more effective. Make America better. Make America great again. Okay. So here are three So there's a guy named Dennison, a guy named O'Reilly at Stanford, and a guy named Hofstede who was at AT&T. They're the three best known commercial value surveys. And I talked to O'Reilly about this last week. He agreed. He said their value surveys are just descriptive. They just come in and tell you what values you have. They don't evaluate your values. And values need to be evaluated. And how do you evaluate values? In terms of their consequences, the results they produce in the organization. So they tell organizations, okay, blah, blah, blah. So, next slide. What if a value survey told organizations about the values they should endorse as opposed to the values they do endorse? And that's a really interesting question. I don't know anyone who's ever asked that question. I read this stuff all the time. I think we're the first people to really ask the question. So, next slide. What are the values of successful organizations? Well, you can answer that question empirically. You don't have to invent answers. There's a guy named a Russian. He calls himself a mathematical historian named Peter Turchin, a really smart guy. Wrote this brilliant book called War and Peace and War. And what he shows is, it shows that basically war is unavoidable, that the history of the species is a history of warfare, that we evolved there's competition inside the group for status, and there's competition between the groups for survival. It doesn't matter who's, so we're talking about a couple of million years. The level of violence during the Stone Age was 20 times as bad as the level of violence during World War II. We evolved as warfare-producing animals. And you're in this part of the forest, and they're in that part of the forest, and they decide they like your part of the forest better than their part of the forest. They come to see you about your part of the forest. And when they come to see you, they don't come with their lawyers. And if they succeed, they don't just kill you, they eat you. And if they eat you, you disappear from the gene pool. Biology is all about reproduction. If you're in somebody else's dinner, you're pretty much, your chances of reproducing are kind of limited. So what I'm saying is that there was biological selection pressure for successful organizations where success is defining the ability to defeat your enemies. So what are the characteristics of, so human groups always fight, bad things happen to the losers, they get eaten. What are the values that characterize the winners? And there have been clear winners. I mean, the Roman Empire was a winner for 1,000 years. The Arab Empire, when they took all southern Europe. The Ottomans were in place for, 350 years? They were really successful. So there's the guy who's an Arab political scientist, mathematician, political sociologist named Ibn Khaldun. I learned this from Turchin. Wrote a book in the middle of the 14th century on organizational effectiveness. And he said, in his view, that which predicted successful organizations was something he called asabiya. And asabiya, he says, asabiya is what predicts the rise and fall of empires. And what is asabiya? If you read, I don't read Arabic, but if translation is, asabiya means social solidarity, a sense of shared purpose. It means engagement. So what does that characterize successful organizations? Engagement. And so, blah, blah, blah. So, okay. So, next slide. Now, this book by these two Hopper guys, it was a New York Times bestseller. Probably if you're going to read it, only read like the first 50 pages because it gets really redundant and really boring. You needed an editor. But it's the only book I've ever found that talks about the relationship between values and organizational effectiveness. It's the only book I've ever found that talks. And so they say, and they argue that it's their term, Old Testament values characterize successful organizations. And then these are their organizations they talk about. Japanese economic miracle after World War II, blah, blah, blah. So Old Testament values characterize successful organizations according to, one guy's a mathematician, the other guy's a banker. But they're both smart and very quantitative. So what are the values that characterize successful organizations? Old Testament, what are Old Testament values? And here they are. There are four things. And I really like this. I think so the question is, what values should your organization endorse? How about these? A higher purpose. If the only reason, we say this to our guys all the time, if the only reason you're in business is to make money, you should just quit. Because that just won't do it. If the only reason you're in business is to make money, there has to be a higher purpose. Our whole deal is if people will listen to us, They make more money and they have better lives. There's a clear higher purpose. Then economic success. If you're not successful in economic terms, you're going to fail. You're going to go at universities, hospitals, museums, whatever. If you don't have some appropriate revenue, you're going away. So economic. I never used to like that because I'm not motivated by money, but it's true. If you're not revenue positive, you're going to go away, even if you're the U.S. government. So higher purpose, economic success. And the economic success indicates that you're doing things right. Rationality, technical competence, and continuous improvement. This is just basically engineering ethics. It's really interesting to see 20% of, I think 40% of the American Republican Party, 20% of American adults say they don't believe in science. How can you not believe in science? What do you believe in then? Black magic and voodoo? So this is, rationality, that's numbers are your friends, database answers, database solution, technical competence, being good at, technology, and continuous improvement, constantly trying to make. So and the culture part of this is interesting. So in the United States, in Germany, in France and in England, in the 19th century, if you were a wealthy family, you would not let your daughter marry an engineer, period. You could not. But in the United States and in Germany, in the 19th century, if you were a wealthy family, you would be happy for your daughter to marry an engineer. So those are two cultures that have different values, right? And how's the U.S. and German economies? So economic, rationality, numbers, database reasoning, technical competence, being good at things, and constantly, and then finally, the capacity for collective action, asabiya, engagement. So then what is the capacity for collective action? What does it depend on? I really like this. The first thing it depends on is equality of opportunity. They said the reason Napoleon's army was so successful was that every soldier knew that they were all if he performed well, he could be promoted to Field Marshal General. Every soldier knew that if they did well, the chance of promotion were there. That's what equality of opportunity means, and it's really it's a fundamental for collective action. It's DEI. It's diversity, equity. It's letting talented people rise, and don't keep people in place because of who they are, but because of how they perform. So valuing equality of opportunity, it's just so important. Everybody's got to know that they have a chance. Valuing expertise by delegating downward. That is, the expertise is down below, so delegate. If you don't delegate your decision making, you're not valuing expertise. I'm a retired naval officer. When I finished my student training, I was a star. I was like first in my class. I got a telegram from the Secretary of the Navy congratulating. I was a real hot shit guy, and I reported aboard ship. And I went to see the senior petty officer, and I said, here I am trailing in clouds of glory. And I go to the petty officer, and I said, what do you want from me? And he said, just stay out of my way. You don't know what you're talking about. And I said, that's right, I did 4 years of college. I don't know how to run a ship. It takes years to know how to run a ship. Valuing expertise by delegating downward, letting the people who are going to have to solve the problems and know how to solve the problems, don't you make decisions for them. So equality of opportunity, delegating downward, where the expertise actually exists. Valuing innovation and continuous improvement. I just love this. My favorite organization in the world is Toyota, the car manufacturer, Japanese car manufacturer. And their motto, their strategic principle is Kaizen and Jojo. And I just love that. Kaizen means constant improvement. Constant improvement is hard. It means, well, that's not the way we used to do things. Well, it's the way we're going to do them now. Constant improvement is really hard to put in place. Kaizen is constant improvement. And Jojo, step by step by step. There's no revolutionary changes. There's no organic changes. There's just step by step by step. Constant improvement, step by. It's just brilliant. And it really, and it's essential and it's hard to do. But that's how you fix an organization. So equality of opportunity, valuing expertise, innovation and continuous improvement, and valuing accountability. And we have real data on this. In the U.S., I can't speak to Brazilian business, but in the U.S., there's a real crisis of accountability. We do 360s on managers, and one of the dimensions is, do you hold your staff accountable. Or, no, it's just the staff saying, does your boss hold you accountable? And only something like 20% of American managers are regarded as holding their staff accountable. Accountability is really, really important. So that's what capacity for collective action. Accountability is really important. It's mostly ignored. So those are the values that will create engagement. Okay? So a lot of people think that the U.S. economy weakened in the 1970s and has yet to recover. And the Hoppers, the two guys that were talking about the Old Testament values, they said the decline of the U.S. economy has to do with the cult of the MBA, wanting to hire MBAs, because MBAs can come in. The notion is that an MBA learns, it's like geometry. They learn the formal principles of business. And if you know the formal principles of business, you can run any business. You don't have to know what's going on at the level of the shop floor because you understand the formal principles of business. So, as I say in my notes, MBAs have formal business knowledge, but they lack local content, and that is really, really important. And the leadership training programs don't talk about content. You need to know what you're talking about. Me, when I reported aboard ship, the senior petty officer said, just stay out of my way, you don't know what you're talking about. I didn't know what I was talking about. You have to understand the business at a deep level, at a fine-grained level, or you don't know what you're talking about. And if you don't know what you're talking about, you'll make bad decisions. And if you make bad decisions, you'll alienate the workforce. If you alienate the workforce, there goes engagement. You really need to know what you're talking about. And so MBAs lack content, and they have bad values. Okay, and the next slide, please. I say they have bad values. Here you go. This is a study of 444 U.S. CEOs, kind of guys that show up in Fortune magazine and Wall Street Journal and New York Times business section. 440 U.S. CEOs. Those CEOs who had MBAs were significantly more likely to engage in self-serving behavior, to run their organizations. And what's the problem? It's called selfishness and greed. And we have data on that. The way you would characterize U.S. managers, there are Japanese managers, there are Chinese managers. Chinese managers look like Communist Party bureaucrats. American managers are greedy and selfish. There you have it. So we assess values with something we call the MVPI. These are the dimensions of the MVPI. Fame, you want to be famous? Some people do, some people don't. Status, do you want to have power and control of resources, or are you happy to let someone else run things? Fun, do you like to have fun, or do you put off fun for later? Hedonism is really, it's fun, but more seriously, it's about work hard, play hard. It's not just work hard, it's work hard and play. It's not play hard, it's work hard and play hard. So that's how we really define it. Altruism, compassion, do you care about the poor or not? Affiliation, do you need and want people around you? Tradition, this is a really powerful dimension of liberalism and conservatism. High tradition is conservative, low tradition is liberal, and if you want progress and innovation, you need low tradition. If you want stasis, you need high. Security, people differ quite substantially. Some people are risk seekers, some people are risk seeking, other people are risk avoiding. And they don't get along at all. And then the commerce is just money. Do you want to make money? Greed and selfishness. Aesthetics. This one is a particular favorite of mine. Aesthetics is about quality products, quality production, quality. And in the U.S., the TikTok is the anti-aesthetics dimension in American life. It's about cheap and dirty, quick and dirty. Aesthetics, couldn't be more serious. There's always money at the high end. But if you want to play at the high end, you have to have quality. Quality is about aesthetics. You can't buy a Ferrari. You have to get on their waiting list is so long. If you want to buy a Ferrari, you get on it 2 years before you get it. There's always money at the high end, but you have to deliver quality to get there. And unfortunately, I think the ethos of American culture is just steadily down. Cheap throwaway. What more stuff gets returned than gets bought. So aesthetics is a really important value if you want a long-term success. And then finally, I say science. I call it rational understanding. That's not the right term. I need to change it. Science is about people with low scores on science trust their guts. They trust their instincts. People with high scores on science believe in database reasoning. Show me the numbers, and I'll make a decision. Okay, so the next slide is a sample of 35 real entrepreneurs from New York. This is their collective, as a group. These are billionaires. These are really successful guys. Really high scores on power, which means they want to make things happen, to get things done, create a legacy. Really high scores on altruism. They want to do things for humanity. They want to make life better. And then really low scores on tradition, because they're creative, they're innovative, they're constantly moving forward. Really low scores on security, because they're risk seekers and not risk avoiders. And finally, really high scores on science. They love our stuff. High scores on science. They believe in database reasoning. We've got numbers to support everything we say. They love our stuff. So that's a profile of a group of, and I think it's quite an attractive profile. Now the next profile is that of a typical MBA. What you see there is high scores on power. They want to be successful, and high scores on money. Notice the entrepreneurs were not super high on money. These guys are. It's greed and selfishness. Power, greed, and selfishness. That's the typical MBA. Then my last profile. This is really important. This is the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Hyde Park, London. Super high and probably the best hotel in London. They were failing. They were failing, and this is the MVPI profile of the 9-person management team. So this is the group. This is their profile. Really low on recognition, which is fine. That means they're humble. Really low on power, which means they don't care about winning. Really low on tradition, which means they're innovative. They were smoking dope in the lobby. It was it was a really jazzy place. I mean, it was really high on hedonism. They really knew how. Low on power, low on recognition. Really high on hedonism. They knew how to throw a party. You came in the door, they gave you a glass of champagne. It was life in the fast lane. Brilliant. But ultra low scores on commerce. Nobody cared about making money. They didn't care about winning, low power. They didn't care about making any money. And guess what? They weren't making any money. Oh, and then really low scores on science. Let's make all this. So we suggested they fire those guys and hire some people with high scores on power, high scores on money, high scores on science, and boom, they turned it around, and now it's really successful. Okay, so there you go. So here are the values that create engagement. A clearly defined higher purpose, Drucker's San Pedro's rule. Wanting to win, wanting to beat the competition. That's not the Soviet Ministry of Agriculture is not trying to beat anybody, but you got to want to win. You got to outperform. If you're in the museum business, you want the best museum in Sao Paulo, don't you? If you're in the business, if you're running a high school, you want the best high school. If you're running a high school football team, you want the best. You want to win. So clearly defined purpose, wanting to win. Data-based decision-making. There's no alternative. Numbers are your friends. Data-based decision-making. Innovation and constant improvement. Kaizen and JoJo. Constantly moving forward, constantly getting better. And then finally, minimum hierarchy. Delegate downward. Minimum hierarchy. Keeping the status levels as thin as possible. Equality of opportunity, which includes DEI. So there you are. Final words. The values of senior leaders create corporate culture. Yes, they do. Corporate culture drives employee engagement. Yes, it does. Employee engagement drives productivity and profitability. Yes, it does. So leaders need to understand their values and how their values impact the troops and what kind of culture they're creating so that you know what kind of people you got and what you're headed for. Because not all values are equally valuable. And people tend not to be aware of their values. So you need some kind of intervention from Roberto Santos to help you with that. Thank you for your attention.